Hi, where are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments.
The air inside the concrete bunker of Wellhead Control Station 9 did not circulate. It sat heavy, thick with the damp, mineral chill of porous limestone and the sharp, chemical odor of bentonite drilling mud that had been pumped under immense pressure 3,000 feet into the earth. It smelled of old water, water that hadn't seen the light of the sun since the late Cretaceous period, trapped beneath impermeable layers of granite and compressed until it possessed the destructive energy of a liquid bomb. From the thick plexiglass window of the observation platform, the active rig floor below looked like a massive, muddy amphitheater of structural steel, where the heavy rotary table turned with a low, bone-shaking groan that vibrated straight through the soles of my heavy rubber work boots. I sat on a grease-stained oak bench near the analog pressure manifold, my hands, calloused, permanently stained with dark manganese deposits and scarred by the high-tension steel cables of cable tool rigs, resting flat against my knees. For 44 years, my official title within the State Water Resources Authority had been Chief Hydrogeological Inspector and Senior Subsurface Pressure Arbitrator. In the slick, glossy marketing campaigns of the modern urban development syndicates, my department was viewed as an obsolete, bureaucratic speed bump from the irrigation era. The new private utility operator, Nova Aqua Infrastructure, had long since transitioned to using automated acoustic echo sounders, satellite microgravity scanners, and predictive digital fluid dynamic models that treated a complex, multi-layered underground aquifer as a simple blue reservoir on a tablet screen. They genuinely believed that securing 20 million gallons of pure water a day for a luxury mountain resort was nothing more than a matter of drilling a straight hole and turning on an electric turbine pump. But satellite gravity sensors do not feel the minute. High-frequency shutter that runs through a 5-inch steel drill string when the bit punches through a brittle layer of shale and enters a high-pressure artesian pocket filled with supersaturated sand. They don't hear the distinct, metallic ticking sound inside a well casing that indicates the underlying limestone matrix is collapsing under a sudden vacuum. I was the man who knew the precise acoustic ring of a stable rock formation, the visual weight of drilling mud when it began to gasify from subterranean friction, and exactly how many pounds per square inch a caprock layer could withstand before the hydrostatic pressure would rip the concrete foundation off a hillside. I was not a corporate real estate developer, a venture partner, or a database architect. I was a physical reader of subterranean geology, pressure gradients, and hydraulic force who had spent half his life standing in muddy trenches, listening to the earth scream beneath the weight of human arrogance. My brother's son, Marcus, stood near the digital telemetry kiosk, his pristine, bright orange high-visibility jacket carrying the sharp scent of a dry-cleaning shop as he flicked his finger across his company-issued smartphone. He was 35, the regional development director for Nova Aqua, a man whose entire professional career was measured in infrastructure deployment velocity, which in practical terms meant forcing drilling crews to double their penetration rates, bypassing mandatory structural curing times for wellbore cement, and threatening state inspectors with immediate political removal if they delayed a multi-million-dollar real estate opening due to watershed safety concerns. The digital aquifer volume certification is already logged into the municipal zoning grid, Uncle Robert, Marcus said, his voice carrying the rapid, aggressive tempo of a man whose stock options were directly tied to meeting a summer construction deadline. Our automated downhole scanners mapped the limestone cavern across 12 independent frequencies. The reservoir is massive, stable, and completely sealed. Honestly, at 83, walking around an active wellhead with an old brass staging bar and a bucket of testing polymer just to check the casing seals is an unnecessary physical hazard. You're holding up our supply pipeline. He was framing my systematic eviction from the groundwater management team not as a hostile corporate termination, but as a protective, familial retirement plan designed to save my aging joints. This is the precise, clinical script of modern institutional liquidation. You never tell a master hydrogeologist that his physical evaluation is more accurate than your uncalibrated software. You tell him he is too old for the mud. The downhole scanners only record the acoustic return from the first 5 inches of rock face. Marcus, I said, my voice low, carrying the deep, gravelly resonance of a man who spent 40 years shouting over the deafening roar of high-pressure blowout preventers. The computer doesn't see the structural cross-faulting in the granite ceiling 300 feet above your drill bit. The system was engineered by the top hydrological consultant firm in Zurich. Robert, he replied, sliding his phone in his internal pocket with a sharp, dismissive movement. We don't need an old well digger using a divining rod and a stopwatch to tell us if the water is ready to flow. We are on a 24-hour countdown to activate the primary pressure line for the Summit Ridge Luxury Estates before the International Investment Audit closes. My investment board and I have already cleared your enrollment at the Pinecrest Valley Sanctuary. It's an exclusive senior village in the lower basin with its own mineral springs, indoor golf simulators, and absolute isolation from industrial sites. What Marcus completely omitted from his fast-paced corporate summary was the fact that his advancement to executive vice president of municipal infrastructure was entirely dependent on delivering 3,000 gallons a minute to the hillside villas before the end of the fiscal month, and that his private partnership had already purchased the water rights to the adjacent valley to lease it back to the city at a 400% markup the moment my regulatory office was shut down. The mechanical friction between my experience on the ground and my nephew's digital development schedule reached a dangerous threshold exactly 2 weeks later, during the production testing of the Wellhead 9 high-pressure bore. The project was an absolute giant, a 30-inch diameter shaft lined with high-tensile steel casing that had been driven through the mountain ridge to tap into a subterranean aquifer known as the Paleolithic Aqueduct. To the project management office, it was a high-yield infrastructure asset that needed to be brought online within 8 hours to avoid a massive noncompliance penalty from the State Development Board. To Marcus, it was the final physical benchmark that needed to be verified before the corporate directors arrived for the public ribbon-cutting ceremony at the resort's Grand Plaza. He came down to the concrete pad of Station 9 during a heavy, gray Wednesday afternoon thunderstorm, his expensive Italian leather loafers getting instantly ruined as he stepped into the thick, gray slurry of overflow water and clay. He was accompanied by a man named Vance, the newly appointed Commissioner of Municipal Utilities, a 36-year-old political operative whose knowledge of fluid mechanics was entirely limited to what he had skimmed from the executive summary of the state environmental budget. "Mr. Thorne," Vance said, his face pale as he gripped his umbrella while the cold mountain rain swept across the concrete pad. "We've reviewed the electronic readouts from the wellhead's main gate valve. The automated flow control shows 0 pressure fluctuations along the primary delivery conduit. We need you to sign the formal hydrostatic clearance certificate so the technicians can pull the manual safety clamps and let the automated pumps ramp up to full capacity." He reached out a leather-bound folder with a digital tablet fixed inside, a legal document that would completely clear Nova Aqua of any environmental liability if the subsurface pressure caused a hydraulic fracturing event or contaminated the lower valley's municipal watershed. "The digital flow sensors are reading the pressure inside the smooth steel pipe, Mr. Vance," I said, keeping my hands buried inside the heavy, wet pockets of my canvas inspector's coat. "They aren't reading the pressure building up behind the concrete casing liner. The storm water outside isn't the problem. The internal hydraulic lift is." Marcus stepped directly into the gap between me and the utility commissioner, his teeth grinding with frustration, his voice cracking as he shouted over the high-pitched, mechanical whine of the massive 60-ton vertical turbine pump. "Robert, let's end this old-timer performance right now. The pipeline software calculates casing friction automatically based on the fluid density. Every hour this valve remains closed costs the syndicate $40,000 in delayed delivery penalties. Your refusal to sign this clearance is a direct breach of your regulatory mandate. If that screen isn't touched by sunset, Vance and I will initiate an emergency administrative override under the State Infrastructure Fast Track Act." He stepped closer, his face inches from mine, his eyes wild with a cold, financial desperation that contained no trace of family loyalty. We know what this is about, old man. You're terrified that this entire valley is going to run on automated switches without your signature on a piece of paper. But your era is dead. If you don't clear this line, we will have county sheriff deputies escort you off the well site for domestic obstruction, and your state pension's premium medical fund will be frozen pending an immediate compliance review. He leaned in until the cold rain from his hard hat dripped onto my collar. The Pinecrest Sanctuary doesn't take residents with an open state investigation, Robert. You'll be spending your winter in a state-run tenement down by the chemical docks where the tap water smells like sulfur and the floor vibrates every time a waste barge pulls in. Sign the clearance and let the pumps roll. The final confrontation did not take place in the mud of the mountain well site. It occurred 48 hours later inside the ultramodern, glass-walled conference suite of the Pacific Rim Infrastructure Underwriters Group on the 72nd floor of the Continental Tower, a building that looked down onto the city reservoir like a concrete fortress. Marcus had arranged an emergency technical arbitration hearing, using an unmarked corporate vehicle to transport me there as if I were a piece of non-functional drilling equipment being brought before a panel of corporate bankruptcy referees. Chairman Geller, the senior risk underwriter whose global fund had guaranteed $300 million against the completion of the Summit Ridge infrastructure grid, sat at the head of the long obsidian table. Next to him sat Marcus, his laptop open to a high-fidelity hydrological simulation titled Project Torrent, Aquifer Yield Optimization, and Commissioner Vance, who was quietly reviewing a stack of pre-signed environmental waivers. Mr. Thorne, Chairman Geller began, his voice low, dry, and entirely devoid of human inflection. The voice of a man who measured the world solely in risk-adjusted capital returns. Your nephew has provided this panel with an exhaustive, data-driven analysis of the Wellhead 9 production curve. The digital metrics indicate that the limestone caprock is entirely stable and capable of handling the maximum flow rate. Your continued refusal to sign off on the hydrostatic clearance appears to be based on personal stubbornness rather than any measurable engineering reality. The monitor on the obsidian wall flashed an animated loop of the mountain ridge, showing the underground water flowing smoothly through blue digital channels into the luxury resort storage tanks, the interface glowing with a bright, comforting green that indicated zero risk of failure. The simulation is running on an idealized static model. Chairman, I said, standing up from my seat without using the armrests. I didn't reach for a USB drive. Instead, I reached into my canvas rigger's bag and placed 3 separate glass jars onto the polished surface of the table. Each jar was filled with a thick, gray fluid that was slowly separating into layers of coarse limestone gravel, dark silt, and a strange, oily yellow foam. In September of 1988, I said, my voice cutting through the room's silent air conditioning with the absolute authority of a well driller's sledge. The sister borehole of this project, the Deep Ridge Well 3, attempted to tap the same aquifer under identical geological conditions. The company computers at the time stated the casing cement had bonded perfectly with the surrounding rock. But the computers didn't calculate what happens when you have an active karst cavern sitting 50 feet above your production zone that hasn't been mapped by your satellite gravity sweeps. Marcus slammed his hand onto the table, the glass cups rattling against the granite trim. The 1988 incident used low-grade Portland cement, Robert. Wellhead 9 uses an advanced epoxy resin concrete compound that was formulated and cured under laboratory conditions last month. The concrete was cured in a dry room, Marcus, I replied, looking directly at Chairman Geller, whose eyes had shifted from the simulation screen down to the gray sediment in the glass jars. Your drilling crew didn't realize that the mud they were pumping yesterday morning wasn't returning to the surface. It was leaking into a hidden subsurface fault line. That yellow foam in the jar isn't drilling polymer. It's liquefied clay from the foundation layer beneath the main resort plaza 3,000 feet up the ridge. Your automated system is reading the pressure as stable because the well is temporarily plugged by a massive block of collapsed shale. It's not a functioning water line. It's a subterranean hydraulic jack. I pointed out the window toward the gray outline of the mountain ridge in the distance. Right now, the pressure behind that casing is building up at a rate of 80 pounds per square inch every 10 minutes. Because your sensors are calibrated to read internal pipe volume rather than external formation stress, your software thinks the system is balanced. The moment you pull those manual safety clamps to start the main turbines, that hydraulic pressure won't go into your pipeline. It will follow the line of least resistance up the outside of the wellbore, blow out through the foundation of the resort's Grand Hotel, liquefy the entire clay hillside, and slide 20 million tons of luxury real estate straight down into the valley reservoir. In the mechanics of deep earth fluid dynamics, there's an absolute physical threshold known as the aquifer threshold, the exact limit beyond which the hydrostatic pressure of a confined underground water system will rupture the stone ceiling holding it back. It is a mathematical reality that cannot be negotiated by an executive vote, amended by a political utility commissioner, or hidden behind a corporate spreadsheet. I pulled a small, water-damaged blue ledger from my inside pocket. The original 1988 National Hydrological Disaster and Wellbore Registry, certified by the Federal Bureau of Environmental Safety and bearing the permanent restrictive red stamp pressure exclusion number 302 West. It was a physical document that existed entirely outside the company's cloud infrastructure, an original regulatory safety mandate that could not be wiped by a system update or bypassed by a state fast-track development waiver. Under Chapter 4 of the Federal Water Safety Code, I said, placing the ledger directly over Marcus's laptop keyboard, any deep-bore infrastructure project that exhibits downhole fluid loss into an unmapped fault line must immediately enter a mandatory technical lockdown. The well must be killed with heavy-weight barium mud. The automated turbines are frozen by operation of federal law, and the construction certificate is suspended until a physical core drill validation can be performed by a licensed federal inspector. The boardroom became completely silent, save for the faint, high-altitude creak of the glass wall as a fresh wind gust hit the building. Chairman Geller leaned forward, his eyes locking onto the federal red stamp on the canvas cover. He looked up at Vance, his voice dropping into a razor-thin whisper that signaled the immediate end of his professional patience. "Is this safety exclusion active in the State Regulatory Archive, Commissioner?" Geller asked. "Did your department approve an infrastructure fast track that violates a federal pressure mandate?" Vance's hand shook as he reached for his glasses, his face turning an ashen, translucent white as he tried to navigate a regulatory database on his phone that he didn't know how to search. The digital utility portal doesn't show the pre-1990 Subsurface Exclusion Acts. We assumed those restrictions were resolved during the deregulation sweep of 2008. The physical laws of hydraulic pressure aren't subject to your deregulation sweeps, Vance, I said, taking my manual back from the table. If your operator pulls those manual clamps tonight before the well is killed with mud, the hydrostatic lift will rupture the caprock before midnight. You won't be delivering water to a resort. You'll be reading the obituary of every guest sitting in that mountain plaza when the hillside collapses. Chairman Geller stood up, his face completely expressionless, but his voice carrying the finality of a court judgment. The insurance clearance for the Novo Aqua project is formally revoked effective immediately. Shut down the turbines. Get the drilling crews back on the floor and kill that well before the formation ruptures. Marcus sat frozen by his chair, his laptop screen reflecting a series of automated warning notifications that his software was finally starting to generate as the subsurface pressure began to register outside normal operational limits. "Uncle Robert, you old lunatic, you've ruined us. The investment syndicate, they will call the primary construction bonds tomorrow morning. We've already leveraged our entire corporate capital account against the completion timeline. If that certificate is frozen, we're completely bankrupt by Friday. I didn't leverage your capital against an unstable mountain formation. Marcus, your own arrogance did," I said, packing my glass sediment jars back into my rigger's bag. "You thought that because an old man had mud on his boots, his memory was dead and his logbooks were garbage. But a hydrogeologist's job is to read the reality of the pressure, not the profit of the developer. The collapse of Nova Aqua infrastructure was not a gradual decline. It was a sudden, vertical liquidation that erased the company from the state utility registry within 90 days. The International Investment Syndicate and the Municipal Development Group withdrew their $300 million financing agreements within 48 hours of a federal engineering team confirming the active formation fracturing along the Wellhead 9 casing line. The cost of running an emergency well kill operation, stabilizing the hill with deep-set concrete anchors, and remaning the project site exceeded $54 million, a capital expenditure that made the entire resort development project completely unprofitable. Without the expected infrastructure completion bonus to clear his secondary credit lines, Marcus's partnership filed for Chapter 7 liquidation before the winter snow had reached the mountain pass. His luxury performance SUV was towed out of his suburban driveway in mid-January, a quiet financial repossession witnessed only by the local snowplow drivers who watched the bank's agents load it onto a flatbed truck in the gray morning slush. Marcus called my office line once during the spring thaw, his voice hollow, flat, and completely stripped of his former corporate cadence. He spoke for less than 3 minutes, asking if I could use my standing as a lifetime member of the Water Resources Authority to help him secure an entry-level position as an assistant mudweight checker on the low-priority agricultural drainage channels in the Southern Basin. I told him that the drainage channels were using automated drone sweeps now, and that the computers had no operational space for an executive who didn't understand how to read the physical pressure of an artesian well. I was not moved to the Pinecrest Valley Sanctuary. The state council quietly canceled my retirement notice the following Monday morning. They realized that without my specific physical understanding of deep earth fluid dynamics and the undigitized karst exclusions, they couldn't certify a single infrastructure project in the Mountain Division without risking a structural failure that would void their municipal insurance policy. They created a permanent position for me, Chief Groundwater Integrity Arbitrator and Subsurface Pressure Custodian for the State District. My salary is now paid directly out of the state's Core Emergency Infrastructure Fund, more than enough to keep my office warm through the winter storms without ever needing to look at a corporate senior community brochure. I still sit on my wooden bench in the analyst's office at the base of the Mountain Division, watching the digital telemetry lines flicker on the automated pump screens below. The wells operate under my supervision now, their flow rates cross-checked every morning against my physical pressure gauges, and the artesian water leaves the floor at a slow, measured pace, its velocity kept strictly below the critical threshold until the subterranean formation has found its perfect, permanent balance. The younger generation operates under the dangerous, modern delusion that technology is the same thing as control, and that a three-dimensional animation can force the water to ignore the laws of physics. They believe that success is a matter of simply accelerating the schedule and erasing the manual safety margins of the past to maximize a quarterly return. But they do not understand that the pressure does not look at your investment targets, and the earth does not care about your promotion timeline. Every commercial empire, every infrastructure fortune, and every family dynamic is ultimately subject to the physical limits of the material below. My nephew thought he was optimizing a slow asset when he tried to clear away my experience and force me out of the well station. He didn't have the functional capacity to understand that the old, quiet man he viewed as an operational bottleneck was the only structural anchor keeping his entire world from being washed away by the weight of the deep aquifer. In the end, he wasn't defeated by a family feud or an elaborate legal conspiracy. He was simply broken by the unyielding laws of the aquifer threshold he refused to believe was real.